Import the RCM power grades like normal. Add a power grade album if you haven't already. Second mouse button click Import, then select either the PNG or the DRX files. Next you'll need to install the RCM version of the print LUTs. Navigate to Project Settings, then Color Management, then click Open LUT folder. Navigate to where you extracted the Film Unlimited download. If you haven't previously installed Film Unlimited, you can drag over the entire Film Unlimited LUTs folder. Since I already have Film Unlimited installed, I only need to copy the new RCM LUTs. So just drag over the 2383 RCM LUTs folder. Then back in Resolve, click Update Lists. Before we can use the power grades, you'll need to set up Resolve Color Management correctly. This can be done either through the standard setup via the menus, or through node-based color management. First, let's take a look at the standard setup. In Settings, navigate to the Resolve Color Management tab. Set the color science to DaVinci YRGB Color Managed. Next, untick Automatic Color Management, and in the color processing mode, select HDR DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. Any other value here will create incorrect results, so it must be HDR DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. Next, in the output color space, select the format that matches your deliverable. For me, this will usually be Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. But if, for example, you're doing an HDR project, then set that as the output here. Next, we need to let Resolve know the color space of our footage. For raw footage or footage that has metadata, Resolve will automatically apply the correct input transform. For footage with no metadata, like this shot here, you will need to tell Resolve the input color space. To do this, second mouse button click on the thumbnail and navigate to Input Color Space. From the drop-down, select the color space that matches your footage. Since this is Alexa footage, I'm going to select ARRI Log C. Once that is done, the shot is now correctly color managed. We can now apply the Film Unlimited power grade. This shot here is from the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. Since it's a RAW file, Resolve is automatically applying the correct input transform. Film Unlimited is designed for the ARRI Alexa. Even though we are working in a color managed project, you will still see a benefit and more accuracy if you match the Alexa within the DaVinci Wide Gamut space. Much in the same way as a color space transform won't exactly match footage from two cameras, Resolve Color Management will place footage from two different cameras into a unified space, but they still won't exactly match. Therefore, using Tool Alexa is still recommended. If you've purchased one of my Tool Alexa transforms, you should have already received the free RCM update. To use a Tool Alexa RCM power grade, just apply the power grade, then select all nodes and then compound. The current version of the power grade doesn't have a LUT in the last node. In a future release, I will convert the Tool Alexa Rec 709 LUTs to work within the RCM workflow. So if you're watching this in the future, you might need to delete the LUT in the final node prior to creating the compound. Once we've created the compound node, we can now append Film Unlimited. Now let's take a look at node-based color management for SDR grading. Navigate back to Resolve's color management settings. Under Color Science, select DaVinci YRGB. Under Timeline Color Space, select DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. This has to be DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. Any other setting will produce incorrect results. For Output Color Space, select Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, as this is an SDR project. Back in the color page, now we need to manually color manage this footage. First, we'll set up the input transform. Create a new node before the entire power grade. Then, add a color space transform. For the input color space and gamma, select the color space and gamma that matches your footage. This is Alexa footage, so it's ARRI Alexa and ARRI Log C. For the output color space, we want to select DaVinci Wide Gamut, and for the output gamma, we want to select DaVinci Intermediate. Next, we'll set the tone mapping to none, as this doesn't apply to this transform. Now we need to create the output transform. Create a node at the end of the entire power grade. Then add a color space transform. For the input color space, select DaVinci Wide Gamut. For the input gamma, select DaVinci Intermediate. Then for the output color space and gamma, select Rec 709. Now let's take a look at how this works on the Pocket 6K shot. The process is pretty much the same, so I'm going to begin by copying the CST. Then I'm going to paste this into a node that sits before the RCM version of Tool Alexa. Then we adjust the inputs to match our footage. So Blackmagic Design Wide Gamut Gen 5, and Blackmagic Design Film Gen 5. Then the final CST is exactly the same, so I'm just going to copy and paste it from the Alexa shot. And that's it. Now let's take a look at node-based color management for HDR grading. First, we'll go back to Resolve's color management settings. We need to let Resolve know that this is now an HDR project. To do this, we need to select an HDR output color space. Next, we need to modify the output transform. So in our final CST, we need to match our outputs to the flavor of HDR we are grading. Now let's take a look at the node graph. The node graph layout is very similar to the standard Film Unlimited power grade. The main difference is that there is no longer a linear section up the top here. This is because we can decide the gamma and color space of each node. So in the case of our 3x3 matrix, we can set it to operate in linear. Let's work through the rest of the nodes and I'll explain the other differences. This exposure balance node here is similar to the linear and the standard exposure balance nodes in the original Film Unlimited. So you can make linear style corrections in this node. Switching over to the HDR tab, we can make linear style exposure corrections using the exposure control. We can also make linear style balance corrections using the global color wheel, or the temp and tint controls. In the same node, we can also do more traditional style adjustments like contrast and pivot, or saturation. But since you're working before the negative film emulation, keep your corrections as broad strokes here. You really only want to make small fixes or corrections to the original cinematography rather than actual grading. Rewatch the node graph breakdown for the original power grade to understand what should and shouldn't be done at this stage, as the same basic rules apply. While I don't mind how the global color wheel and the temp and tint sliders work in the HDR tab, I still prefer the look of balancing an image using the gain color wheel in a linear node. To my eye, it just looks more pleasing. If we go to the first node, I've set this node to work in linear space. This allows you to make gain-based corrections such as exposure or color balance. But don't make any corrections other than gain-based corrections or it will produce strange results. Also, this node sits prior to the 3x3 matrix as this produces results that are closer to the linear node in the original Film Unlimited power grade. Next, we have a gamut mapping node. Sometimes if you push an image too far, you might see some strangeness in the brightest highlights. Enabling this node should fix most artifacts. Next, we have a node that desaturates the lowest parts of the image. Then we have the negative film saturation, hue, and luma nodes. Next, we have a standard correction node. This is where you can make corrections to skin tones or skin texture, or make changes to the color of any other object in the scene. Feel free to make as many other nodes as you need in this position. Next, we would normally have the halation node. Unfortunately, after many hours of trying, I can't get close to replicating the halation effect of the original power grade. This is due to how colors blend within the color managed workflow. Until I come up with something, this is just a placeholder, and can be used as a standard correction node. The high, base, and low nodes, and the sharpen, film blur, film curve, and high roll-off node all work in the same way as the previous power grade, so there is nothing new to explain here. The grain node, however, has been simplified into a single node. This improves performance with very little difference in the look. This adjustment node works in the same way as the adjustment node in the original power grade. Watch the node graph breakdown for the original power grade to understand what can be done at this position, but basically anything goes. Next, we have the 2383 LUT node. Here you can select the Film Unlimited print LUT you want to use, but you can only select the RCM versions. Any other print LUT will produce strange results. Now, if you don't want to use any LUTs in your workflow, the next section will show you how to replace this LUT with one of my print film emulation power grades that are designed specifically for RCM workflows. The nodes after the 2383 LUT node are the same as the original power grade, so there is nothing new to explain here. So now let's take a look at how to integrate an RCM print film emulation power grade. If you weren't already aware, I've created RCM power grade emulations based on a variety of print films. You can find these in the store section of my site. To replace the existing LUT with a power grade, select and delete from the 2383 LUT node onwards. Navigate to the RCM Print Film Power Grade, second mouse button click, and select Append Node Graph. You can then delete the exposure balance node. It's unlikely you'll need this gamut mapping node, as there is already one earlier on in the power grade, but I would leave it in place just in case you do need it. Next, it's probably a good idea to compound all these nodes just to tidy up the node graph. You can always enter into the compound node if you need to make adjustments. And that's it.